come to just pose.
So welcome back everybody from your lunch break. Sorry it was a short one today, but as promised we'll try and get you away a little earlier. Panelists have now joined us, I'm delighted to say. I'm just checking that you're on mute for the moment because we've now got 18 people in the room. So you've had the bios of our panelists, and prior to joining yesterday, I reminded you of who was joining us, and hopefully you can see the panelists on the screen now. So we've got Angela Scott, who's the CEO at Aberdeen City Council. We've got Kath O'Dwyer, who's the CEO at St Helens Borough Council. And we have Carolyn Downs, who is the Chief Executive Officer at London Borough of Brent Council. So I know that some of you were a little bit reticent to ask your own questions earlier. Sorry, I've got one person just joining. It's great. So we've now got 19 people in the room. Excellent. So if you could remain on mute until you want to ask your question. If you could raise your hand, I'll come to you. So you can put your question to the panel. So given some of the reticence, and given that it's International Women's Day, one of the questions from our delegates to the panel is, how are you driving diverse representation and thinking within your organisation? Is there any of our panelists that would like to respond to that? How are you driving diverse representation and thinking within your organisation? Does anybody have any examples?
Yeah. I'm happy to come in there. This is Carolyn, and hello to everybody. So I'm extremely lucky being in Brent. I've probably got one of the most diverse organisations in the country, with 67% of the staff who work here are of Black and Asian backgrounds, and 70% of our staff are women. So that will just demonstrate just the level of diversity that we have. So how do we drive that? Actually, I think some of that is about the labour market and the local labour market as much as anything. But what's important for me is to make sure that actually we're not like a pint of Guinness, so that the organisation is black and brown at the bottom and completely white and male at the top. So what's really been important for myself over the past 8 years is to make sure that the representation of the organisation, the diversity of the organisation is replicated at the most senior levels. And actually, we have we're not correct yet. We're not 67% women in senior positions, and we're not 67% Black and Asian colleagues in senior positions, but we have got very high levels, 50% women, and the top 5% earners, we have over 40% Black and Asian, which I think is probably some of the best in the country. So how have we done that? Well, you can't do that through external recruitment, frankly, because there just aren't the people necessarily there. So we've done it through deliberately talent spotting and developing our own. And so we've had a very, very strong programme of internal training, development, and it's not singular, it's very specific. It can be career specific, gender specific, race specific. It can in fact be very technical, but we've definitely put together development plans for all those people that we think are potential future leaders. And last year 70% of our internal promotions were from Black and Asian colleagues, and I think it was 60% were women. So I think it shows that you can actually make a huge difference. It doesn't mean things will change overnight, but it does mean that if you really put a lot of effort and you continually promote it, you can make a significant difference over some period of time.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm just going to come to Angela and Kath. Is there anything you would add? Don't feel that you have to, but if there's anything that you would like to add that you think would be useful for the delegates.
Yeah, happy to. St Helens is a metropolitan borough in the northwest of England, primarily white population, and I joined 8 days before lockdown, which wasn't quite the, you have a plan for your first 100 days, that sort of went out the window. But starting from quite a low base in terms of EDI focus in the organisation. A lot of work we've done around organisational culture, making sure everybody's got a voice, that the culture in the organisation is about respecting each other and respecting differences. We didn't even have sort of staff networks, so we now do, around mental health, around EDI generally, Black, Asian and minority ethnic network, disability network, all of that sort of stuff. But actually having it threaded through the whole organisation value and behaviours is what's made the biggest difference. I think we've all probably worked in organisational cultures that weren't ideal. And so, making sure that we've got that opportunity for everybody to have a voice, and I'm very lucky and very privileged actually. So my senior management team, there's 4 of us, 3 of us are women, and a very supportive ally in our male colleague, but that's quite unusual. But recruitment to reflect our local population is a challenge for us. There are 24 local authorities travelable from my local authority, so a lot of competition around recruitment, but it is about investing in the people that you've got, spotting talent. And I do think as female leaders we've got a responsibility to support all the women in our workplaces, and a big fan of mentoring, and reverse mentoring actually, and creating those opportunities for people.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Would any of the delegates like to put a question to the panel? Please unmute if you do. Would like to. Lisa? Lisa, unmute. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. It's really good to meet you all. My question was just around if it's possible for you to sort of give us a little bit of an insight of some of the challenges that you've perhaps experienced of women in leadership positions, and how you've sort of overcome some of those challenges as part of your journeys within your careers, really. So quite a general question from myself.
Anybody like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to start really. So so I'm a social worker by trade, which isn't a usual background to become a local authority chief exec. I'm 5 foot nothing. I'm common. I've got my nose pierced and I wear Doc Martens. So I've had lots of folk tell me that I don't fit the mould, and I was told that I was too common to work in a particular group of authorities that were sort of county and perceived to be a bit posher. So I made a point of making sure I did get a job there, and because there's something very nice about proving people wrong. But I've been very lucky in that some of my female bosses have been able to see past some of that stereotype requirement and create those opportunities. And that's why I'm so passionate about doing that for others, really. And I think there's a great expectation around leaders being authentic and being themselves, rather than trying to squeeze themselves into a mold that doesn't quite fit. don't get me wrong, I still have meetings with developers who think I'm there to make the tea, and you know, very male-dominated organisations that come in and meet with me and some of my wider leadership team, and they assume that the man is the chief exec and that I'm not. So that just gives me great pleasure in putting them right, really. But I think there are lots of obstacles, but I do think there's probably less than there were. When I talked to my mum, there's less obstacles for me than there was for her. And when I talk to my daughter, so I've got 4 kids, the youngest is my only girl, and she doesn't face quite the same. So it's working, we're getting there, but I think we've got a lot more to do. But it's how we support each other and create opportunities for each other, and spot that talent and nurture it, really. And well, my view is you don't have to fit into a mould. You just have to be yourself and be good at what you do.
Thank you. Angela, Angela, you were raising your hand there. Thank you.
Could I just build on Kath's comments? I mean, I guess the biggest challenge is one of yourself, isn't it? Your own self-confidence in order to put yourself forward for a senior leadership position. And we've probably all met female colleagues who have chosen not to put themselves forward into the race for a senior leadership position. So I think the trick is around your own challenge and your own limiting your own ambition, because often I think as women we think that we're not ready or we haven't got all of the experience. And again, if we contrasted that with male colleagues, you know, male colleagues would probably take a role on and then worry about it. But I think instinctively we would worry about our ability to do roles. So I think one of the challenges is one of ourselves and that confidence. And I guess in terms of how to overcome that, I think Kath's right. The longer you go on, then obviously the more confident you get. But it's also about knowing that as the senior leader, you don't know everything and you can't possibly. So I think part of the trick is around how you select teams and have colleagues around you that do have areas of knowledge and expertise, and that you don't try to present yourself as a senior leader that you have all of the answers. I guess given that this is International Women's Day, and I'm really thoughtful about that, I think for all women in senior positions, we've got to be really clear about we're sharing the unpaid work of parenting, and that we have as much right as senior leaders to be present in the life of our families and our children. And so I think that being really clear with our partners that we're sharing that unpaid responsibility of parenting, but also to do that in a work context as well. I take kind of great delight. I never missed a sports day of my kids when they were in primary school. The things that actually are important, and you want to be present in the life of children. So I think the challenge is to not accept that you have to compromise your family in order to be a senior female leader, and that actually we have the right to be present in our families as well as to be present in work. And the final bit for me and again, I'm just thoughtful that this is International Women's Day, is that given the nature of the services that we run, some of what we're dealing with is really tough, and it's emotionally tough, and it's emotionally draining for us as senior leaders, and often without the right of a reply as well, which can quite challenging. And I think that empathy is important to be able to demonstrate that, whilst also being able to move an organisation through the challenges. And again, being truthful to yourself. I think that's what Kath said, being truthful to yourself about how you're feeling, and that we don't try and curtail our emotions. That's what we bring to work. It's the diversity, your first question, it's the diversity, it's the emotional intelligence that we bring, and we shouldn't, I guess I've tried to try overcome any hesitation that I might have had around showing that empathy and that emotion.
Thank you. That's very relevant to some of the discussions we were having yesterday. Now, I'm going to come to you in the order in which you raise your hand, but Rosanna, can I ask if your question is a new question or is it on the same topic? Because I've also note that Carolyn probably wants to contribute to this particular area of interest.
Probably a new question.
Okay, do you mind if I go to Carolyn first then? Because I think it's probably the same subject, is it, Carolyn?
It is, and I wanted to. I won't repeat Angela's comments, but I absolutely 100% agree with the what she said about childcare and children. I am older, I have to say, sadly, than probably both Angela and indeed Kath, and I'm due to retire. And I've spent a lot of my career being the only woman in the room, I have to say it was challenging at times. It was very, very challenging indeed. And I have worked in some authorities where, you know, the sexism that you experience was really quite atrocious. And I can't imagine that overt sexism being in any way acceptable or accepted today in the same way it was. However, I think at least it was in the open. And I think there is a lot now that isn't quite as open. And I think it's very important for us. And when you're on courses like this, what I would say to you, as you become more senior in local government, the world becomes quite small and you get to know everybody. And generally, you tend to know all the people who are at the top as well. And if you're a woman, you tend to know the women, and you should be giving support to those women. So when you're on courses like this, you know, extending your network and creating an allyship is extremely important, because you can't be battling against the system the whole time, and actually learning how to maneuver it and how to actually challenge it in a way in which you win, rather than be seen as a trouble causer, which we often can be as women, as assertive women. You can be seen as being bolshy or a trouble causer, when actually you're doing nothing, in fact, a lot more collaboratively than a male colleague, but you're treated completely differently as a result. So whilst I completely agree that things are so much better than they used to be, I do think we should not pretend in any way, shape or form, which no one here would anyway, that things are still not tough, and gender stereotyping does still happen.
I think you're on.
Sorry, I was. Rosanna, I'm sorry. I'm coming to you now. Would you like to ask the panel your question?
Just firstly, thank you for that last contribution, because I found that really, really interesting, and actually to be able to call a spade if it needed to, that was really helpful. My question, I've got two, but I will just ask one. Was asking the panel what the single most impactful opportunity was that they went for that moved them from a frontline operational role into a more strategic leadership role. Kath, reflecting on that you started as a social worker. I'm a social worker, and it's what are the opportunities that kind of make that jump? Thank you.
So, I mean, to be honest, I did the traditional route. You know, I was a social worker, I became a team manager, I was an IRO for a bit, I became a head of service, and I just moved up. But I was very lucky to have some quite inspired and inspirational bosses, largely female, but social work is more female dominated than lots of other council departments. But I think as colleagues have said, it's a tough gig. Nobody only works their hours. And when you're trying to juggle that with, as I said before, I've got 4 kids, and trying to juggle that when they were little was an absolute bloody nightmare. But you do have to hold some things sacred, no matter what folk think. So, you know, don't miss a sports day, don't miss a school assembly, you know, those sorts of things. Actually, that gives permission to the rest of the workforce to do the same. So it is about modelling some of those permissions and that equality of opportunity, regardless of now whether that's care and responsibilities for children or whether it's for older, parents, or it doesn't matter. Some things are just sacred, but it is about, I suppose, I always had a goal. So I want to be this by the time I'm that age. I want to be that by the time, and that's what works for me, really. And so there was always an eye to the next one. And what do I need to line my CV with in this one? What can I put my hand up for to do differently or extra, or, and part of that was about lining the CV, but part of it was always also testing out whether I wanted it. Because there is, you only see a part of somebody's job. You don't know it until you're in it. So actually, testing it out a bit to see whether it's something you want to do. So I moved to Ofsted for 3 years. It wasn't for me, but I tried it and I learned loads, but I learned that it wasn't for me. I moved into the private sector on a 3-year contract, still in the council, it was an government intervention contract. And I learned loads, but I learned that I'm a public sector girl by heart. I'm not a private sector, so it's okay to try stuff and realize that it's not for you. But having a plan to how you get back to where you want to be. Don't know whether that helps at all.
I found that very helpful, so thank you.
Thank you. Angela, you wanted to add to that conversation?
Yeah, just in terms of impactful opportunity, I took on a non-executive role and I undertook that for 5 years. So as part of that, making a shift from kind of one position in a hierarchy to senior leadership, the non-executive role I undertook was incredibly helpful. It forced you to be strategic. By its very nature, you weren't in the middle of the operations and therefore, and again, you had a window at a board meeting of 25 members to ask a really insightful, impactful question, which couldn't be in the operations, and being surrounded by others who were really operating at a strategic level. I did that in addition to my full-time job. And again, I would say there's about preparation for leadership, and it's about the skills and the knowledge and sitting in an organization just moving because you're on that run and not preparing yourself for the knowledge and the skills that you need to have when you reach the absolute top. I think that's flawed. So my advice is to start to really think, and the point that Kath said was, I would really underscore, there's a set of skills that you need and a knowledge that you need to be wearing the chief executive, and often we don't talk about what those knowledge and skills are. So being curious about them now in where you're sitting and starting to actively try and acquire those skills. And you may not naturally get them within your organisation. So going outside of your organisation, as I did for 5 years in my spare time, it was a big commitment. But I thought that's the responsibility of preparing for leadership. So membership like that, being involved in a local charity or a formal non-executive role, I think it allows you the ability to acquire those strategic skills. It also, if I'm being honest, it also prepared me for the ability to be asked to ask questions on areas I didn't know anything about. And given local government in our breadth as chief executive, you're presiding over a massive range. I'm a unitary authority. I couldn't have an expertise in every part. But what I do know is the nature of the questions that I need to pose. And from being a board member, when I'm not satisfied with the answer I get, how I then continue to kind of ask those questions till I get to a level that I'm comfortable. And I'm not sure I would have necessarily understood entirely the value of those skills until I've landed wearing the chief executive shoes. So I would encourage you to speak to your own chief executive to understand that knowledge and skill, and to then actively start, because it's a massive bridge to jump from operations into strategic corporate role, there is quite a shift to make. But things like a non-executive, I found that incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Angela. Any other delegates like to put a question to the panel? Can I encourage you to do so? I know all your questions haven't been covered. Meg, you'd like to unmute.
Again, echo everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's absolutely remarkable. I'm beaming from ear to ear. It's been fascinating. I just wondered where you think the future of the local authority is, and it's probably a huge question. So I don't know, top 3 things over the next 10 years or something like that that you think will local authorities change significantly, and what will those 3 changes be, or will they indeed stay the same? And therefore, what do you think the challenges might be that we're facing in the future local authority?
So can I start on that one? Thanks. So I've worked in local government. I did 3 years in the civil service, which I loathed, actually, a bit like your Ofsted experience, Kath. But other than that, I spent 40 years working in local government. And I know this sounds a bit mad, but it's not that much different now than it was when I first started. I mean, it's much better. It used to be differently funded, and we had different ways of, we were almost in the olden days, if I can use that expression, a bit like employment institutions, which, you know, we were there for the sake of the council rather than for the sake of the community at times. So I do think there has been huge improvements in that respect. And but actually, in terms of the functions, was it Blunkett who actually said if you didn't have a local authority, you'd invent one? You'd have to invent one. So I do think, obviously, there will be changes going forward. I do hope the funding situation changes, because it's genuinely not sustainable as it is at the moment. I look at particularly in relation to housing, I do not know how, as housing authorities, we are going to, certainly in my neck of the wood, we're going to be able to continue to deal even with basic health and safety in people's homes, and retrofitting for net zero. I just don't, and then dealing with the level of homelessness. I mean, we're having about 154 presentations of homelessness a week, and I know that I've got 600 refugees in the borough who, given the fast tracking, will be turning up as homeless pretty soon too. And you do kind of think, my goodness, how on earth are we going to be able to deal with all of that? The truth of the matter is, it will be tough, but we will get through it, because we always do get through it, and we always adapt to the latest challenge. And now I know there are some councils that aren't amazing, but there are many councils that flipping well are. And I think the resilience of local authorities has been extraordinary over the last 13 years. And our ability to continue to flex will continue. I feel a much more capable and nuanced leader now than I did 12, 13 years ago, without a doubt. So all of you now coming through the system are going to be far better leaders than I've been, because the experience you've all gathered over the last, I would say, 10 years or more is really, I think you've gained some absolutely amazing experience at a time of massive change. And so what you're able to do is see that change is not a bad thing, and where you have to change, even if you don't agree that you should have to change, always use it to the advantage, always look for the positives, and always try to make the best out of it. And I think in doing that, we will continue to do so, and we will continue to exist. We won't change massively in terms of the structures and the functions, but I think we'll continue to change and be at the forefront of public sector reform, without a doubt.
Thank you, Carolyn. Angela, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just in terms of, I guess, 3 challenges that we're facing, and then therefore what that means. I think it's the UN who's predicting 250 million people worldwide will be displaced as a result of climate change. Yeah. So actually what we've experienced in Ukraine will dwarf into insignificance in comparison to that. So in the way that Caroline was describing, I think the challenge and the opportunity is how do we, in a more agile way, cope with, at a place level, that dispersal of a global population. So I think that's a challenge, because again, the housing model, the models that we have fit a paradigm of 18th century, 19th century population, whereas what we're saying is quite significant. So there's something about what's the agility of shelter and that model and what that's going to look like that could be significantly really interesting. I think the kind of second challenge is just the explosion of neglect, isn't it? So we would recognise historically public protection issues, but what we are seeing is an explosion of neglect within families, part of which is coming because of the cost of living. But again, I kind of resonate a bit with what Caroline's saying. Is that any, is the neglect today any different than the 18th century, 19th century neglect that local government was right at the heart of? And I guess at that time we were able to demonstrate that we were really leading public health and we championed the improvement. I think the opportunity for us now is to be right at the heart of leading that now in a 21st century way and be identified as being public health bodies. And I think the third challenge is a societal one. Again, you reflect on your kids. I mean, my kids wouldn't know how to post a letter. I mean, they wouldn't even know how to go and buy a stamp. So there's something, that's the reality of our customer base. And then, you watched during pandemic and we were all trying to switch to digital delivery. We have got a fantastic challenge and a fantastic opportunity to really reinvent our kind of delivery. And I guess within that, be willing to surrender some things that digital can just fix for us. So in all that transactional interface we have, let's just strip ourselves back out of that space, use the technology. So the capacity we do have, I agree with Caroline, use that capacity to get close to our communities, understand, be a kind of 21st century set of local authority leaders that are really focused on their place. So I think there's a global population challenge, how we're going to cope, because as Caroline said, inevitably all of that comes down to us at a place level, and that's what we represent. I think there's how we respond to the explosion of neglect, 21st century neglect, and how we're going to respond to that. And then I think the third area for me is the digital response.
Thank you, Angela. Kath, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just the Caroline mentioned, the different funding mechanisms for local government now, where we're very much, the money we've got is the money we generate rather than the money government gives us. So there is something about councils being much more commercial. So my team will often quote me as saying, my place directorate brings the money in and my people's directorate spends it. Because we are having to be more commercial to be able to respond to an unprecedented demand for social care services. And that means for right across the organisation, top to bottom, everybody's, we're looking to everybody to be more innovative, do more with less, which we've been at for, as Caroline said, 10, 13 years or so. But there is still more to do. But I think there's increasingly there is a need and an approach of looking at stuff through a systems lens rather than individual organisation. And that's where I think we can get some opportunities to do things better. Because actually our customers, let's be honest, they don't care whose logo is on your payslip. They just want a joined up service that meets their need. So there's always more we can do at system level. And then I think there's also, the changes through devolution and government looking to combined authority footprints, which in some respects can become another layer, but also certainly, brings opportunities for funding, particularly capital, that we perhaps wouldn't have had in other ways. But there's still lots to fix about how the money comes to us and the maturity of the system to be able to respond to that. But I do think being more commercial is something that we've increasingly getting into the space of.
Thank you, Kath. Would any of the delegates like to ask the panel another question? Kate, thank you.
Yeah, hi panel, and thanks for attending today. It's been really interesting. I guess what I'd like to ask and say is that one of the things that I struggle with, and know that a lot of my other colleagues and friends do, is imposter syndrome and feeling like you don't fit in certain spaces. And I think one of those reasons is because you often, I find I am one of the only females in a room at times. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on that, and see how you've dealt with that, if you have, and if there's any ideas of ways we can combat that as like a group of women together.
Happy to start on that. I don't think you should underestimate how many men suffer from imposter syndrome as well, actually. So I think it's something that we all have about our self-worth, maybe how we were brought up, what aspirations we were given as children. I don't know, like Kath, I come from a very ordinary background. My mother thought it would be brilliant if I became a secretary, because that was much better than her, who was a cleaner. You know, and so, you know, how we start life impacts how we are in later life, and that is for the positive and also can be for the negative as well. So I have definitely suffered throughout my career from imposter syndrome. I have to say I don't think I do anymore, and that's not because I now think I'm amazing or anything like that, but that's because I've come to accept who I am and what I am. And I think that's something that we're not taught enough about. And when we do all kinds of classes and training, etc., understanding who you are and accepting who you are and then being authentic to that person is probably not enough. We don't get enough of that, to be absolutely honest. And so I think I've finally, you know, I'm in my 60s now, but I think finally in my 50s, you know, probably when I was about 55, and sorry if it's going to take you all that long, but I hope it won't. But eventually when I got to 55, I thought, what on earth are you bothering about? You are who you are, just bloody get on with it. And if people don't like you, they don't like you. That's all there is to it. Trying to be something different is not going to make them like you anymore. They just won't like you anyway. So just be who you are, be happy about that, or accept it. And then I think people will get to know you, the real you. And I think that makes you a better leader, actually, if you do all of that. So maybe not the answer you were perhaps expecting. I think most people, the people who don't suffer from imposter syndrome, I think are just not telling the truth, frankly.
Carolyn. Angela, so you, I think, wanted to say something on this.
Yeah, just to build on Caroline, I mean, I think there is something endearing about it, though, isn't there? The humility of saying we're not all fit for these roles, and I guess that if you stop entirely thinking that, there's a risk around you close your sort of, you know, you stop having a growth mindset. And so I agree with Caroline that there's a bit around, you have got to find a way to not allow that sense of that syndrome to take over you, because it could become very consuming. And I agree with Caroline, I think there's a bit around, with time and maturity and having the right friends and professional friends that support you, then I think you can manage to live with the syndrome in a way. But there's an attractiveness to it, because the syndrome has shown your own humility, isn't it? To say you're never going to take for granted that you know everything. And in the complex world that again we've all been describing, none of us have the answer to that. So I wouldn't try and overcome the syndrome. I think it's about learning to live with it And at points, I was thinking it's like the, you know, the devil and the angel on your shoulder. Sometimes you listen to it because maybe it is telling you don't know the way through all of this and you need to reach out. I think it was Caroline that said about the importance of having a network. It's very easy to kind of get lost in that, because people expect you to have the answer, that you will have the answer. So I think that, you know, having the devil and the angel on your shoulders and being self-aware to know sometimes you have to listen to the syndrome to say you don't know this and you need to reach out to your network. And then other times, you know, the devil just kind of saying, I'm just going to ignore it for now, and I'm going to learn to live with the syndrome. You asked, I guess, what we can all do in this world, and I think it's the Cheryl Sandberg from Facebook. I think it's the lean in. So I think if we are in rooms where there are women, then there's how we lean in to support each other. I think Caroline said that at the beginning. How do we support women? Because we don't have the right to be round a table because we're women. We have the right to be round a table because we bring a diversity of knowledge, skill, and experience. And so we have to be confident when we are around those tables to demonstrate that knowledge, skill, and experience. But other women recognizing the syndrome, I think we can help each other. So that bit around, building, I would always try to build on somebody's contribution, particularly women. And so again, I think there's a bit around how we can all behave in all of that. But I think it was maybe Kath that said, we bring something different to the table. And so that if you don't bring that to the table, the decision making of your organisation is weaker for it. So I think there's a bit of a moral imperative to make sure that you don't allow the syndrome to take over, and therefore that different perspective. And I guess as you become senior, having diversity of thought is the way it keeps you safe. It keeps your system safe, and it keeps you safe as a chief executive, because there's so many different perspectives and aspects to issues. It's so complex that you need that diversity of contribution. So remember, it's of huge value to whoever, male or female, whoever's sitting in the senior ranks of your organisation. The diversity that you will bring of thought and contribution is going to make that decision richer and better, and the outcome better as a consequence of your contribution. You not sharing that is not going to serve the organisation well. The challenge becomes, I guess, if you really are saying something quite different and where you are becoming an outlier. And I guess, again, I think it was Caroline that was saying how we build alliances. So whether, and I guess we all do that, male and female, and we mix our alliances and our partners in order to kind of support that case that you're trying to make. So I wouldn't personally fight the syndrome. I think it shows your humility. But I think it's how you live with it, but also then around how you build alliances, male and female, that then just give you your confidence to lean in.
Thank you, Angela. Rosanna, I'm aware that you've got your hand up, but Kath's also got your hand up. Was this something about the imposter syndrome that you wanted to add, Kath?
Yeah, just briefly, really, that I think it's okay to think, to acknowledge you don't know everything.
Yeah.
I think part of it is building a good team around you. I think part of it is a bit like what we were talking about before, to be honest. As chief exec, everybody expects you to have the answer. But every now and again when you say, well, actually, I haven't got a clue. So let's, a bit of thought sharing. But actually, your curiosity, if you're curious, you'll get to the answer. And I think there's something about, for example, when I first became a chief and I'd spent all my career in people services, adults, children's, public health, all of that. And I suddenly took on Regen and I hadn't got a clue. I've never felt more of an imposter than that stage of my career. But actually, being curious, surrounding yourself with folk that do know, and that sort of collaborative leadership approach, and going with your gut, because sometimes if it don't feel right, it isn't. but it's asking those questions and getting to the bottom of it. So you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be the expert all the time. You just have to, but also understand what it is that makes you feel that you're an imposter in that place. So is it because you haven't got the knowledge? Is it because you haven't got the skills? And then do something about that. So it becomes less and less as you go forward. But we all have days like that. Absolutely, we do.
Thank you. That's been really helpful.
Thank you, Kath. So Rosanna, you have a question. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Rosanna, you're on mute. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so this question's thinking about recruitment. So within your organisations, have you had any kind of creative ways of recruitment not being so restrictive to kind of one in, one out? So in this organisation, they're thinking about using attributes a little bit more. Is there anything that in your organisations are helping refresh some of the senior leadership in the way that you're recruiting people? I see Kath's hand up.
Yeah, I suppose it links back to my earlier comment about organisational culture. So lots of people will have the skills to do the role, but actually I think if you're determined to create an organisational culture that supports and nurtures and respects and all of that, then we've moved into a much greater focus on values and behaviours as part of the recruitment. Because I mean, you will know for jobs that you go for, that when you apply for a job, initially you think, this is about me proving that they want me, but actually it's as much about finding out whether you want to go there. So because it's equally important to be in the right place as it is to be in the right role, because you can be in the right role in the wrong place and be very unhappy. So having much more of a focus on grow your own, because recruitment is a massive challenge in all sorts of different areas across the council, but also having that focus on values and behaviours and fit, whether the person will fit with the organisation. Because really, by the time you get to final stage interview, everybody knows you've got the skills for it. It's that focus on fit, and I think we underestimate that sometimes, and that candidates should be exploring the fit as much as the organisation is exploring the how well the candidate fits into that place in terms of values and behaviours.
Thank you, Kath. And Carolyn, can see you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, so I think this is quite a challenging question, actually, in some respects, because so we, very, very keen when we do recruit externally to increase diversity where we can, and sometimes that means going outside your comfort zone as an employer. I'm very clear at the most senior levels in the organisation that you're actually not looking for a technical expert. You're really looking for a person, as you mentioned, with the right attitude. So you're looking somebody with the right attitude, but somebody with just the general capabilities of management and leadership, which doesn't mean that you need to be an engineer or a librarian or whatever, or social worker. It just means that you have those genuine leadership skills. And that's quite risky. So we've done one such recruitment recently to our top team, and ended up with getting a brilliant and diverse candidate whose areas that, of expertise, whilst he's been a senior manager for many years, is not in the area which he's now actually leading. And that brings that individual challenges. So that person needs to be in a really supportive environment where people will give time and will allow mistakes to be made. And also, it's important that the organisation doesn't expect immediate success. in the way that you might do in a more traditional recruitment market. So I think it's a really good question that you ask in terms of attitude, as opposed to necessarily technical capabilities. I think if I was doing my whole top team, I would probably look for a mixture of those rather than just doing one or the other, and try to get it blended as well as you possibly could. But anyway, I'm probably a bit of a traditionalist in that respect.
Thank you, Carolyn. Any other questions from the delegates? Felicity.
Hi, good afternoon. I guess leading on from the culture piece again, I was just interested to understand how you've adapted your culture to fit in with new ways of working following the pandemic, like hybrid working, and how you've tried to embed the culture of your organisation in working in that hybrid way.
So I mean, I'll start. So as I say, I joined St Helens 8 days before lockdown. So I literally did, I think, 6 days in the town hall and then went home for 16 months, which wasn't quite the plan. So we did, as well as dealing with the pandemic, we did a whole top 3 tier reorganisation during the first 12 months. So we did a lot of recruitment remotely. And as a senior team, I only had one member of my senior team when I started. So I recruited the rest of my senior team remotely. And we didn't actually meet until the Christmas. And then it was lots of conversations like, oh God, I thought you'd be taller, you know, because everybody's the same height on teams, aren't they? I am only 5 foot, can I just say so? So it was even more important to test out that sort of culture and through the recruitment process. And we learnt loads about, you know, I'm quite a big fan of psychometrics anyway, but we used much more of that. What you would say, I think, would be good recruitment processes anyway, you know, where you've got different panels, we've got staff, you've got partners, and your skills bit gets tested earlier in the process, and it is that fit by the time you get to final round. But also in terms of the organisational culture, we had quite a bit to do here. So we've invested in our OD capacity. We've invested massively in staff engagement. We've recruited, so we co-produced the values and behaviours with our staff. We have culture champions, we've got 150 of them across the organisation that constantly feed back to us and we check out with and test out with. And that's really helped us move it forward. But it's not something you can, it feels a bit like if you take your foot off, it'll spring back. So it's not something that you do for a couple of years and then move on to something else. I think it's something you've constantly got to keep your eye on, and have the mechanisms to check in and check out how it feels, whether it's working, what are the issues, and giving that whole value and behaviour stuff is about giving staff a voice. So I do tons of staff engagement, A, because I like doing it, and B, because I learn loads, because when you're at the top of an organisation, sometimes stuff gets filtered. So it's actually much better to get out there and hear it for yourself, and create an environment where there's no risk to individuals for telling you what's what. So again, it's all back to values and behaviours, but it's not an easy fix. Culture change takes a long time, and you have to keep your foot on it.
Thank you. Carolyn.
Just quickly, so we've got an amazing building in Brent, and we had, even before COVID, we had a policy of 3 days working from, up to 3 days working from home. So as a result of that, post-COVID, and obviously everybody, likes the fact, particularly if a lot of our staff can't afford to live in London, so they've got quite a distance to travel to work, so they were saving quite a lot of money, etc., etc. So we were given quite a big push from colleagues to go reduce that. So we've ended up saying that senior managers, so heads of service and above, must be in the office 3 days a week, so that their staff can see them and there is visibility, leadership visibility, and that every member of staff has got to come into the office at least 1 day a week. I'm being honest now, I regret that. I do regret it. I'm being completely honest with you. I think the organisation has lost something from that lack of contact and that lack of personal interaction. I think the creativity that we all enjoy often comes from informal contact rather than formal contact. I think collaboration often comes from bumping into somebody, which isn't a part of a Teams meeting, or just having a conversation in the margins of a meeting, I think is really helpful as well. So I'm just being really honest with you that we were already pretty flexible. We've gone more so, and if I was staying, I'm obviously due to retire, but if I was staying, I'd be seriously considering bringing that back to people being in 2 days a week, frankly. That's still, I think, a real privilege. Gives you the majority of the time working at home. And I think actually, I'm sure every council the same, we've adapted to the majority of people working from home fabulously well. But I do question in some teams, not all, but in some teams, the levels of productivity.
Thank you for your honesty, Carolyn. Yeah, a question that's come up with some other government departments that I've been working with recently, how we manage in the hybrid environment. I'm just conscious of the time. Is there anybody that has a very quick question for the panel? If not, there's one I'd love to ask. So you've all talked about having a network of support. You've talked about having some inspirational leaders that helped you to see the way. Kath, you even talked about perhaps a mentor. So one of the things we're going to do at the end of today is review personal development plans, what we've learned from this event, and your participation has been, I can see how much this has meant to people because their faces are absolutely beaming. But how would you choose the right mentor, given your experience now? If you weren't in the position that some of you have been, where you've had quite an inspirational leader, Kath, thank you.
I think it depends what you want out of it. So I think you have to work out what you want out of it, what your goal is, and then decide whether what you need is coaching or mentoring, because they are different. I'm not sure they're as different as some people think they are, but they are different. And choose somebody with the background that you think will help you achieve your goal. But that's why you have to work out what your goal is first. But I think the most important bit is you have a chemistry meeting before you commit. You have to click. And if you don't, find somebody else, because you're wasting your time and theirs, quite honestly. You have to click. So, and they have to understand where you want to get to, and they've got to be confident, and you've got to be confident they can help you get to where you want to be. So I think it's being clear about your goal. It's being clear whether it's coaching, mentoring, or a bit of a mix. It's being clear that the person you're engaging with has got the skills and the background or the knowledge to help you. But most importantly of all, it's a chemistry, whether you click.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Angela, I think you were going to add something.
Yeah, I think it's like the Nanny McPhee, what you need versus what you want. And what we need is somebody that cheerleads us and, you know, is there for us and agrees with everything what we say. That's not what we need. That's not to say you don't need the cheerleaders. And so again, I think the point that Caroline made just around in your network, people that can be that cheerleader, because this is a marathon, they're not sprints. So you do need a cheerleader, you do need a sympathetic ear, but a coach is more about what you need. And that comes from self-awareness about your strengths and weaknesses. I agree with Kath, the chemistry. So I met mine 3 times. And it was only on the 4th time, so that was 3 different times I met him. I wasn't sure, and then only by the 4th time. And then I found that the accountability for the things I was avoiding, that commitment to sort of re-meet him, giving him permission to kind of text me to say, did you do what you said you were going to do? So there's something about in the space, what permissions, the nature of that relationship and the permission that you want to give them, but also recognizing your need changes. So I've had a kind of few, as we all have, few really challenging situations that really stretched you, and you don't go backwards after that stretch. So your need then changes again. So not being kind of caught out of a loyalty to who you started your journey with. As you progress, your need absolutely changes as well. And I guess just again, bringing it back to our domestic and our family relationships, just being really clear about what it is that you want from your partner, what you need, and that's different than what you need from a coach and a mentor, and just being really clear with spouses around that space. I think that's important too.
Thank you very much. I am conscious it's 2 o'clock. Kath, Carolyn, you've raised your hand. Are you okay just to respond?
Just very, very quickly. So I would just say, you must have senior women in the organisations you work. I think once you get to the top, you've got a responsibility not to pull the ladder up with you. And so use those senior networks in your organisations to find you mentors as well. So if somebody in my organisation came to speak to me, I would seriously consider putting them in touch with somebody who I thought would be able to help them. So all I'm saying is use your senior women managers in your organisation to extend your networks.
Thank you. Fabulous advice, and very topical. We looked at the differences between coaching and mentoring yesterday, and that was a question that one of the delegates put to us earlier. So thank you very much for your time. I just wonder if I can ask you for 1 more minute. We would love to thank the panels on LinkedIn, if you agree to that, perhaps with a photo, and celebrate International Women's Day. So if you don't want to be included on the photograph, then please turn your camera off, but otherwise we'd be delighted if you could join us in celebrating International Women's Day and thanking our panel. Let me just see, get a little bit closer. There we go. I don't know, Jack, if you're taking a picture as well, so just in case mine's a bit smeared. Thank you very much. That was extremely useful. And as I say, I can see by everybody's faces, they've really appreciated that. Thank you very much to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.